Joining me now from bloodhorse.com to preview the Kentucky Derby, Byron King. Hey, Byron, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for letting me on the show there, Carolyn.
It's such an exciting time of year for people that follow this sport year round. And there are a couple of horses in this field that I think people are familiar with, and then some that are new stories to tell. First off, just looking at the 20-horse field, how strong do you think the field is overall?
It's very strong. There's 20 horses. There's 3 of them on the also eligible list. Those are essentially alternates hoping to get into the race. That's how Rich Strike drew into the race in 2022. So it is a highly desired thing to be in the Kentucky Derby. Most horse races or major stakes races have 14 or fewer horses, and we've got 20 of them in there. Pretty much all the main players. We've had very few setbacks among the leading horses on the road to the Kentucky Derby this year. So everybody who's earned their way is here.
It looks like Todd Pletchers, he's got a couple, but Forte, his horse Forte, the odds-on favorite right now, drew a fairly favorable post position. How would you analyze where Forte landed?
Well, he drew post position 15, which for his style is a pretty good starting position. From out there, of course, about 3/4 of the field will be inside of him, but he's a late running kind of mid-pack type of horse who's known for his strong finish. So horses like that, you typically want to be in the clear to where you can make a long, steady run, whereas a horse that is speedier or something like that, or a little more prominent, you might want to be inside and save a little more ground. So for him, being toward the outside is probably beneficial, but there's so many things that can happen too that you just cannot foresee. You know, if the 16 horse happens to dart in right at the break and bump him, the 15 post could end up being detrimental. So there's still a huge element of chance.
And you mentioned last year a horse winning from a post position that we very rarely see. So it is hard to predict, which is why it's so fun. And there's so many quality jockeys in the field. I think about a horse like Angel of Empire and Flavian Pratt, who has had a phenomenal year. Who do you think stands out from a jockey standpoint? I know it's more about the race car than the driver, but who has the hot hand right now in terms of jockeys?
Well, we have, with so many in the field, we've got all kinds of different types. So to give you an example, on one end, we have John Velasquez, who is a Hall of Famer. This will be his 25th ride in the Kentucky Derby. He rides Reincarnate. He's won the race 3 times, which is most of any jockey in the field. 4 times if you count Medina Spirit, who crossed the wire first but later disqualified. But then you can contrast that with a horse such as Skinner, who has won Hernandez aboard, and he has never ridden in the Kentucky Derby, but he's the leading rider at Santa Anita Park, one of the top venues in the country for horse racing. So some of these guys is going to be a new experience, and for others, like Johnny V, it's going to be old hat. This is his 25th time doing it.
How valuable is Kentucky Derby experience specifically for a jockey?
Well, it's unlike any other race. So it is important in that sense of they've been there, done that, those kinds of things. But we've seen jockeys win it for the very first time. Last year's jockey, Sonny Leon, no name, largely smaller tracks. We've had other jockeys such as Stuart Elliott win the Kentucky Derby after really not being an active part of it before. Ultimately, what it boils down to first and foremost is the horse. The horse is who's doing the running, right? And the jockey can certainly make errors. He can make a tactical decision to go inside and then get stuck behind some tiring horses. He can do something like that. But usually the horse is instrumental in the victory. Now, you do have some phenomenal rides. I don't mean to diminish. Everyone who's watched the Kentucky Derby probably remembers the 50-1 upset by Mind That Bird under Calvin Burrell about 10 or so years ago, maybe more than that now. Time flies by. But he rode the rail, which was so uncommon for a horse coming from dead last, and managed to win the Kentucky Derby going away. So sometimes these jockeys elevate their their horses' performances. Other times they make tactical errors that can hinder their chances, but it's just really so hard to say. And some part of it is just luck, do the breaks go your way?
Yeah, and I know that the weather is always a big sort of X factor, especially when it comes to getting a bit of luck. I think the last time I checked, it's supposed to be dry, supposed to be about 75 to maybe a fast track. Does that favor the whole field? Does that favor a particular horse?
Well, most of these horses, I would say, 9 times out of 10, races will be contested on a fast track. Of course, every racetrack, thoroughbred racetrack, is banked slightly toward the inside, and so they can quite often pack it down when it rains, and so the water flows slightly to the inside, and then the next day it's fast, and there's a slight chance of rain on Friday, which is Kentucky Oaks Day, the day before the Kentucky Derby. But even if it were to rain, I think we're going to have a fast track. I would say that a fast track is the most consistent, the fairest surface for all these horses. And the bigger question in my mind would be is if it were going to be wet, we'd have a lot more unknowns because so many horses maybe hadn't run on that kind of surface before. But fast tracks, not so much. For some of these horses, they'll be brand new to Churchill Downs, so you don't have that kind of experience of knowing how they're going to perform specifically at Churchill. But there are some in the field that have run at Churchill Downs previously, and that by looking at their form that they ought to run well.
Is track familiarity important for the horse?
Well, I think it gives bettors a little more confidence because it takes away one unknown element in a sport that has a lot of those, right? When we're handicapping horse racing and looking at it, you're trying to weigh who's going to win this race. It's like this puzzle that you're trying to figure out. And if one element of the puzzle you get to start with, like, oh, I know this horse is going to handle the conditions at Churchill Downs, you've got just a few less things to solve. But it's just one piece of it. But some experience is beneficial, I'd say, but it's not necessarily a requirement.
Some of these horses are coming in early with morning line odds at a pretty good price. And I know it's hard to handicap a 20 horse field, let alone bet on it and make a winning bet. But when you sort of look at the macro view of this year's Kentucky Derby field and some of these horses that we're seeing at 15 to 1, 12 to 1, 20 to 1, how do you sort of assess what we're going to see this year? Are there a number of horses who have a lot of pace? Are there a number of horses who might stalk? How does the favorite Forte fit into that mix?
Well, we are going to have some huge prices. Of course, what happens is the larger the field, usually the higher the prices can be. It just stands to reason. With horse racing betting, what happens is as the money comes in on various different types of horses, the most popular horse is the shortest priced horse or the favorite, right? And the horses like a Rich Strike that very few people bet are 80 to 1, right? And so we will have a wide range of runners, some that will be 30, 50 to 1, that kind of thing. But what people love about the Kentucky Derby that is if it's nice to pick a winner, but then if you pick an exacta or a trifecta or a superfecta, these kinds of bets in which you go 1, 2, 3 or 1, 2, 3, 4 in some cases, I mean, you can have a home run score and, leave the racetrack or wherever you're betting it with, a lot of change in your pocket. And that's a fun thing. And the Derby is the greatest betting race there is because, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it's just so much deeper than the vast majority of horse races.
Something a little bit different about boxing up an exacta, even at a very, very affordable price and having it hit and walking away with a little bit of cash. It's just so exciting with a field that's got 20 horses in it. Is Forte for you the class of the field? I know that he is the favorite.
Yes, he is, and he is my selection. This is a horse who is the most accomplished horse to run in the Kentucky Derby since Nyquist back in, I think in 2016. Nyquist was like Forte, a champion who had, was dominant at 2. Nyquist was undefeated. Forte's only lost 1 time, but he's riding a long winning streak going back to last summer. He is a horse that's 2 for 2 this year. He won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile last fall at Keeneland. That is the biggest race for 2-year-olds every year. So he has a lot going for him, with the exception of one thing, is he doesn't have a lot in the price category. If you're going to bet Forte, you're going to be, getting about 3-to-1 odds in a 20-horse field.
Is there anything that you've seen over Forte's last couple of races that might indicate that, he might have a little bit of trouble in a field this large?
Well, his last race was quite interesting. He ran in the Florida Derby, and he looked like he was in really deep water on the second turn. He was gaining slightly, but not near at the pace of another horse who was running in the Kentucky Derby by the name of Mage. Mage blew past him on the outside and looked like he was going to win, but Forte just kept grinding it out, and he ran him down and won by a length. Now, it was not one of these races that he was just so dominant that you said, oh, this horse is, 5-10 lengths better than everybody else. But I did think it showed some fortitude from him. I compared it a little bit to, a basketball player who, his outside shot isn't falling, but he finds another way to win the game. That was kind of what Forte did that day. Things weren't coming easily for him, but he got it done. I think it also shows that, Mage is a very nice horse. And, we were talking about a little bit about some of the prices, Carolyn, in this race. And Mage will be a good price for those that are looking for those kinds of things. He's only run 3 times. He's a little inexperienced. So like last time he broke slowly and then circled wide and couldn't quite finish it off. But if he gains a little more experience and if he can put it all together, which sometimes the Derby is a hard race to do that because there'll be, 170,000 people here. It can rattle one of these horses. So, but if he can put it all together, he's a very, very talented horse, Mage, the runner-up in the Florida Derby.
Yeah, really good price for Mage, and I like that horse. What about Twofills?
Twofills is a horse that's got a lot of buzz. A lot of observers like him. He raced at Turfway Park last out in what's called the Jeff Ruby Stakes. The Turfway Park surface is it's a partially synthetic surface, so it's a little different than what we have at Churchill Downs, which is more of a clay-based dirt surface. For some horses, they have a certain preference for a certain type of ground. So whether or not he can replicate that here at Churchill Downs is, the big question. But he is a horse that has a prior victory here. In fact, he was a stakes winner in the Slop, and it would have been a horse that, you could have made a case for if rain was in the forecast, which, of course, it's not. We were talking a little bit earlier that we're expecting a fast track. But I think this is a legitimately good horse. He might not have gotten the greatest post position. He was post 3. And since 1987, when Ferdinand won from the rail, posts 1, 2, 3 have been quite poor. We've only had one winner real quiet from there. I think they're collectively like 1 for 100 since that time period. And what happens is with the large field, naturally, all the jockeys and the horses are looking to move closer toward the inside as they come in, and sometimes that will shuffle back those inside horses if they don't get away super cleanly. Is
it post 5, 6, 7 through 15? I mean, where's that kind of sweet spot, at least as history indicates? Because I know we've got some of these incredible stories of outliers who come from, on the rail or from way, way outside. But traditionally, where are you really kind of in good position?
Well, I think I'm going to go off memory here, but I think if I remember right, Post 5 has the most winners at 10. I hope my memory's serving me right there. But some of these are anomalies. Like there's like a post or two that's never had a winner, right? But then the ones next to them have done fine. So why should whatever 17 be any different than 16 or 18?
Yeah.
It's just some of these things, sometimes statistics can be a little bit misleading, but I think most people tend to prefer those kind of middle posts, but maybe it's just our mindset as people that aren't extreme, right? And there's a tendency to either dislike the inside or the far outside or whatever it may be. But that's the conventional thinking. I think some of it depends on the style of the horse. So like a Practical Move, who's the Santa Anita Derby winner, his last few races, he's rallied up the inside. So here's a horse that clearly is not intimidated by that kind of a scenario. So a horse like that, had he drawn inside, it might not have been so much of a negative for him. He, as it turned out, drew smack in the middle and post in. So.
Is there a long shot in the field that you really like as you kind of think about who maybe might not win? I mean, if Forte really is as classy as everybody thinks that he is, maybe he does run away with it. But in terms of finishing in the money, which outsiders, which long shots do you think could be really good value?
Well, there's a number of them I think that you can go toward. One horse that certainly merits mentioning. We talked about Twofills is a horse that I think could run well at a price. He's not a super huge price, but I think he could as well. Derma Sotogake, the Japanese, he's one of two Japanese horses in the body of the field, or the initial 20 horses. There's one more that's an alternate. I think is going to run a good race. They're more kind of middle price kind of horses, but in terms of like a really kind of exciting price horse, I think you could take a long look at a horse named Skinner. Skinner is trained by John Sheriffs, who won the 2005 Kentucky Derby with Giacomo, who was a 50-1 shot. And this horse has a lot of similarities to him in terms of being a late running horse who has been racing out in California, who hasn't really come on everybody's radar yet because he hasn't won one of these big prep races, but he has shown a lot of promise. And he's a horse that, as I mentioned earlier, Juan Hernandez is riding. So this is a horse that has a lot of people excited, but he is only just 1-4-6, hence why he'll be a long shot in the Kentucky Derby.
When you watch horse racing, Byron, around the calendar year, you really are struck by how different it is on Derby Day with the energy and roar of the crowd, because to your point, so many of these tracks are so much more quieter, and there are big stakes races and Keeneland always has a great crowd, but the Kentucky Derby is unlike anything else. And so just how big of a deal is that, especially for some of these horses that haven't run at Churchill?
Well, it is unlike anything else. I mean, the Kentucky Derby is a spectacle. It's. I hope for all all your fans and people that are watching this have a chance to take it in sometime in their life, and because it's magical. There's a reason it's called the greatest 2 minutes in sports, and there's very few sporting events that can draw 170,000 people. That's pretty amazing stuff. It is you're just taking your best guess in terms of which horse might best handle that, because it's unlike anything they have seen before or will see again, unless they happen to run the next year on one of the supporting races on Kentucky Derby or Kentucky Oaks Day, which in fact Rich Strike is doing on Kentucky Oaks Day. Kentucky Oaks Day draws about 100,000. So he will be undoubtedly a fan favorite on Friday. But that's just part of it, where you just kind of have to just kind of close your eyes a little bit and guess. Now, you can make an educated guess. So, like, for example, Tappet Trice, who is one of the Kentucky Derby favorites, I knocked him down a few pegs in my picks. I don't have him among my top four because he's broken slowly in his last 2 races, and he seems to dislike dirt kicked back in his face. And because of the size of the Kentucky Derby field, there's a greater chance of that happening, in addition to the crowd and all those kinds of things that could contribute to him braking poorly. So, you can just kind of make an educated guess there, but in terms of just knowing for sure, there's really no way.
Who's in your top 4?
So my top 4 are Forte, Angel of Empire. Angel of Empire won the Arkansas Derby. He has shown a great deal of stamina in his races, and should relish the 1.25 miles. Derma Sotakake is my third selection, coming from, he's trained in Japan by Japanese connections, but he went and raced in the Middle East this winter, raced in Saudi Arabia and then in Dubai, won the UAE Derby. And then in 4th, I've got a horse I haven't mentioned yet, Verifying, who's drawn in post 2. He was the Bluegrass runner-up. He's a horse that I'm willing to give a little bit of forgiveness to his post position, because I think from there, his jockey's going to ask him to run to try to avoid the traffic coming down on him. And I think that the makeup of this field, there's not a tremendous amount of early speed or horses that go to the front. That might be to his benefit that he could get out there. So they're my top 4. I really do think Tapit Trice is a talented horse, but I'm a little worried about that, those little quirks. I think he'll actually be quite dangerous down the road in the Belmont Stakes, which is 1.5 miles and is the 3rd leg of the Triple Crown. Between those two is the Preakness, the 2nd leg of the Triple Crown, 2 weeks after the Derby, and the Belmont is 5 weeks after the Derby.
That's an interesting thing to sort of file away, that Tapit Trice could potentially spoil a Triple Crown bid. What would a Kentucky Derby win mean for Todd Pletcher's legacy? I think does he have 3 horses in the field?
He does. He has 3 horses. He had wanted to run 4, but one of them was going to be an alternate, and so he decided to run that horse in a different race on Kentucky Derby Day. But Todd Pletcher has won the Kentucky Derby twice. He's run more horses than any trainer in the history of the race. He's run 62, so if all 3 of these run for him, this will be his 65th. This will be, I think, the 12th time he's run 3 or more horses. So this is an annual focus for him, and he's a remarkable trainer. He's in the Hall of Fame. I have the utmost respect for him as a trainer. While statistically his numbers aren't especially good in the Derby in terms of 2 wins out of whatever I said, 62. The depth of this field, this is a hard race to win. There's another trainer in it, Steve Asmussen, who has never won the Kentucky Derby, and he's the winningest trainer in North American history. So this is not an easy race to win.
I didn't realize that Steve had never won the Derby, and I feel like for people inside the sport, not the knock on Todd Pletcher because it's such a difficult race to get into, like you said, but when Bob Baffert had the majority of the spotlight, it felt like Pletcher was the guy who could get your horse there, but not necessarily get your horse the win. And now with, Baffert not being there for another year, do you feel in any sense that this is Todd Pletcher's time to have a little bit more of that spotlight, to have some of his accomplishments be recognized, whether it be with another Kentucky Derby winner or just the fact that he's got 3 horses in the field?
Yeah, I think all these guys, because of trainer Bob Baffert's success, any year they don't necessarily have to outrun him or outrun his horses, provides them with a little more opportunity. One ex-Baffert horse, Reincarnate, is in the field here. He was transferred to trainer Tim Yaktine in order to qualify. Bob Baffert is barred by Churchill Downs through running through this year's Derby due to some equine medication positive cases. But I do think it would certainly help Todd Pletcher, or help anybody for that matter, should they win in terms of their legacy and that kind of thing. But And the same thing goes with Steve Asmussen, who was, just desperately trying to win it last year. Here he is. He probably thinks he's a winner in mid-stretch. He has Epicenter, the favorite, who has the lead, and out of the blue comes this 80-1 shot, Rich Strike running him down in the closing yards. I mean, it was like you couldn't believe it. It was we were all just flabbergasted by it, and Rich Strike only drew into the race as an also eligible the day before.
Byron, thank you so much for the time and the analysis. It really is fun to try to predict what's going to happen on the first Saturday in May, even though it's a very difficult job. I really appreciate the time.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Carolyn. Thanks for having me on.